Hi, my name is Pranav Kothari. I work at Educational Initiatives. In this episode of EI Dialogues, I have Sharath Jeevan, who is the founder and CEO of STiR. EI Dialogues is our way of bringing conversations that are held in closed corridors, in conferences, in meetings to everyone in the world who's interested in knowing about the journey of an organization or how they can make their mark in education. STiR has been an organization that Sharath started as his second social enterprise. In this conversation, I want to understand what prompted him to transition from a career in the corporate sector to starting two NGOs. I want to understand what STiR is doing with teachers. What does he mean by intrinsic motivation, and how does he measure success? STiR has achieved fabulous numbers of working with many state governments and children in a way that ensures there's mutual accountability, where the government is an equal partner in this journey. Thanks so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, Pranav. Great to see you.
Could you tell us a little bit about STiR? What does it do? What does it stand for? What's the theory of change?
And I think really what we're trying to achieve is how do we get children and young people in India and other countries really prepared for a 21st century where the only certainty seems to be uncertainty. How can they adapt and thrive in a world where they'll need to change jobs, change places they live, all of these elements of technology, societal, political change they'll have to deal with in their lifetimes. And we think really that love of lifelong learning is really, really critical. And the best place to develop that foundation is in school, really with the kind of change agent of the teacher, who's that influence who can really help them set them up for their whole life.
So what are these changes in teachers that you're looking to do?
Well, I think really starting with the child first, I think we really want the child to be, first of all, engaged in what they study. How do we develop that love of learning? That means they first of all need to feel emotionally and physically safe in the classroom. If they're being beaten at school or shouted at by their teacher or abused, it's very hard to have any meaningful learning happening. They need to be engaged in the classroom and really deeply engaging in their studies. They need to develop curiosity and critical thinking and self-esteem and confidence along the way. Also, they can actually develop that academic mastery, but as well as really engage in the learning process.
So how do you make this happen?
Yeah, so I think rather than try and work directly with children, which sometimes we try and do in our sector, the problem is that it's not very sustainable. It's also very expensive to go that way. But we've got obviously in front of the child every day, day in, day out, throughout their life, you've got that agent of the teacher. And how do we help the teacher role model these elements? I think is what we've been really trying to figure out at STiR. So for example, if the child has to be, needs to feel emotionally and physically safe, how does a teacher create a learning environment, a classroom environment that models those behaviors? If the child has got to think critically, how does a teacher create and teach subjects in a way that encourages that critical thinking? So it's just that, how do we create that really strong role modeling effect at the teacher level? That's been the core question we've been trying to figure out.
Sounds really difficult. I'm not sure. The deeply entrenched system with people's behaviors being hardened over the years. I mean, what you're trying to do is almost do a U-turn from what's happening right now.
I think there's some truth in that for sure, but I think there's also a lot of energy and excitement. And I think teachers, they want to be that role model, that change in a child's life. I think often we put them in a box and we think of them as a conduit for technical skills typically. And I think we need to think of the teacher much more holistically as really someone who can really change that child's life. How do we motivate them to develop that? And often I think we as a sector tend to push things on teachers and assume that because we've got the great pedagogy or training or tech solution, they'll respond automatically. But in fact, how do we create that deep demand among the teacher to want to change, to want to become that change agent? And we've learned the key entry point is around intrinsic motivation there.
What do you mean by intrinsic motivation?
So it's not motivation because they're going to be biometrically fingerprinted, which is happening in many states now, not because they're going to be given a performance bonus at the end of it, really because they feel that deep sense of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy that they feel they can change their classroom meaningfully. Many government teachers feel that they can't do anything in terms of change. A sense of mastery, secondly, they're getting better as professionals. And again, we often train teacher in a diet, they go into the workforce, we never see any training or real development again. And thirdly, purpose. They often feel like a bureaucrat, a a government babu instead of really someone who is really that key change agent. So we build that sense of purpose among teachers as well.
Would you say that intrinsic motivation is something that exists in every human, everybody is born with it, or is there like a trigger, or is there like an igniting of that happens, and that's when it really starts emerging in a human being?
Yeah, so I mean, being Indian, I really believe in this idea you can fall in love after getting married, and I think we can really reignite that spark in everyone. I think everyone who became a teacher, there's something in them to a lesser or greater degree about wanting to make a difference there. But we've been spectacularly successful as an education sector in taking all of that energy out, and we want to reignite it. So using a very simple model of local teacher networks, we've found actually almost all teachers are responding and can be reignited that way around as well.
Can you give some more examples of what are the things that you're doing with the teachers to make this change happen?
It's a very simple approach at the core. It's a couple of hours a month. Think of it almost like a microfinance group for teachers. 20 or 30 teachers come together in their local area across, say, 10, 12 schools at the level of a cluster. They meet up for a couple of hours. They're exposed in that meeting to lots of new ideas, pedagogies, practical things they can do to improve their teaching based on all the evidence globally and in India as well. But they are not told what to do. They as a group have got to uncover that evidence, discuss it, make it relevant for their context, agree an action plan. They practice it in those 2 hours. They commit to each other. It's almost like microfinance there. There's an element of social capital being built. They try out that in their classroom. Someone observes them trying it out. So they get some developmental feedback. They come back a month later and see what's happened.
Sharath, when you're trying to talk to these teachers, are you appealing to a particular sense? For example, are you appealing to the teacher's ethics that, hey, you are a teacher, you are morally obligated to help these children learn? Are you appealing to a sense of growth, that by doing this as a person, as an individual, you would grow? Are you appealing to a financial barter, that you're getting paid to do this, and that's why you need to do it well? What sense of the teacher are you appealing to?
Yeah, great question, Pranav. And I think this goes to the heart of motivation theory. There was a professor in the 1970s called Frederick Hertzberg who developed this theory of motivation. What he basically said was that, actually quite surprisingly, what we think motivates us actually doesn't motivate us that much. So things like pay, the financial side, working conditions, all these things, these are important, what he called hygiene factors, right? So you need to be able to be paid enough to put bread on the table. You've got to be have sensible working conditions, etc. With the pay commissions in India, obviously Indian teachers are now paid among the best in the world relative to per capita GDP. That doesn't seem to have done anything to improve even basic things like absenteeism rates, right? 1 in 4 teachers are still absent on a given school day. So what we've learned is to really motivate someone, you've got to go to higher order motivators. You touched on many of them. The idea of autonomy, the teacher feeling they actually can change something. That's really fundamental because so many government teachers have given up on that key point. That sense of progress and mastery. They're real professionals, they can get better at their craft. Making it feel visible and seeing a path to that becomes very important. And then purpose you touched on as well, that they don't feel like a government civil servant. They really see how they are instrumental in actually changing that child's life. It's really obvious to all of us, but somehow we've created a system that has taken that connection between the teacher and child away and replaced it with bureaucracy. And we're trying to almost rehumanize it in some ways.
Interesting. Would you mind if I became a teacher for the next few minutes? Sure. And you're from STiR and you're trying to convince me to come to one of your meetups and join the program. Sure. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Fine. So I'm a teacher in rural UP, and I'm a 5th grade maths teacher, if that's okay.
Hi Pranav-ji. Really lovely to meet you, and I've heard lots about you from your colleagues in the school. We're just setting up a new approach around a local teacher network. We'd love you to join it. It's starting tomorrow. I just came to ask if you'd be open to joining us tomorrow.
Oh, I have so much work to do. I have to fill out these 50 registers for every child. I need to write what their learning level is. And, there are 3 positions that are vacant in the school, and I need to take their classes as well. And I'm sorry, Sharath, I just have too much to do right now.
So it's really, and it's a good point, and so many teachers like you, Pranav-ji, are struggling with some of these issues. What if I told you that the network meeting, one of the things we do is actually how to help refocus you on your teaching itself? Because what I'm hearing from you is that you probably might have joined teaching to actually make a difference to children. But it sounds like your job has become an administrative job now to a large extent.
I'm a really good teacher. I've been teaching in this school for 20 years, and I have seen many students do well, and our 10th standard pass percentage in the school is 99%. So we actually are doing a great job in the school.
Well, yeah, so no, I'm great. I'm really proud of what's been achieved in your district, and I've heard really great things as well. What we find, though, there's never a point by which you become a true master of anything, and what we try to do in the network meetings is help you get better and better. So your kids are really engaging more and more, not just to pass the exams, that's important of course, but so they really become engaged as learners and become a lifelong learner. So many years after you leave them, they'll thrive and become a really strong citizen, a worker, and someone who can contribute to India more generally.
These kids, do you know these kids? Their parents don't pay any attention, they hardly do ever any homework. Many of them come to school just to eat the midday meal and run away after that. I really don't think there's much that can happen with these kids.
Well, the thing is, because many parents, many of these kids are first-generation learners, your role, Pranav, is so important in helping shape their life. And what we will talk about in the network meeting is how you can do that. There are many frustrations, and often you may not have enough support from parents, but there are many things you can do as a teacher to change that within the confines of your own classroom. And what I'm sort of hearing a little bit is a sense maybe of being a bit isolated, a bit lonely maybe, and you seem to be carrying all of this burden on your own shoulders.
Yeah, absolutely. I told you there are 3 teachers missing, and the government is just not filling those positions. So all of that work comes on me, and I have to stay beyond hours and take work home and grade all these worksheets and fill all these papers, and it's really a lot of work that I have to do.
No, I hear you, but I guess one thing is by meeting other teachers, you'll be meeting 20 or 30 other peers from around your local district. You'll have a chance to learn, to share with them, and there may be some good tips and things you can discuss on how to manage that workload. The other thing is you have to be in the school anyway for 6, 7 hours a day. You might as well make that as fulfilling as you can and have as much impact as you can.
So what time is it? Is it during school hours?
So the government because we work with the government, it's officially sanctioned now in UP. You'll have a couple of hours built into the school day, so to make it really accessible for you to be part of, and especially if you were a female teacher. We know many female teachers struggle with transport and safety as well in UP, so we've tried to make that less of a barrier. But I can definitely promise you it'll be one of the best 2 hours of your professional life. It'll help you galvanize your work, and all the other hours you spend in school, I think, will feel much more productive and useful, because you'll have some strategies and tips that you can really apply into what you do every day as a teacher.
But you guys are transient, you'll come, this is just another scheme, you'll be here for 1 or 2 years, then you'll go away, and I have to deal with the officials who will keep asking why am I doing things differently, why am I not finishing the syllabus. You will come and go, but I have to be here forever.
So we agree with as an NGO, we can only be there for a fixed period. We are there for 5 years, we'll be in your district for 5 years, but we've told the government from the start we will be out at the end of the 5 years. And everything is being run by the government. The people running these meetings are people already in the system that we've selected, and I'm motivating and training them to run this, so that this is all part of the government. We don't want this to be some parallel thing that you do as a sort of fight or flancy. It's really something that is core to how you work in your system.
I'll think about it, Sharath. I'll sleep on it, and I'll do my best to attend.
Sounds good. I'll give you a call tomorrow and check in. But please talk to the other teachers in your school. They're really enjoying it and seem to be changing how they teach, which is really exciting as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time.
No, pleasure.
So thanks, Sharath, for maybe explaining to what happens on a daily basis with some of your team members on the ground. What's the motivation? What's the intrinsic motivation for your team members to do this on a daily basis, where the people that they are meeting with, they're just sort of maybe visiting a hostile environment, right, which is resistant to change. So what takes a STiR employee on the ground to do this day in and day out with hundreds of teachers and principals and schools and visiting the last mile to convince them to go above and beyond the call of duty?
No, I think it's one of the most challenging roles out there, and I'm always in awe. I spent some time with our team in Karnataka this morning, and I'm just in awe of what they've got to deal with. We have one person per district, one person supporting about 5,000 teachers. And so the only way this will work is if our team member, we call them a district lead, they become an exceptional leader, an influencer and motivator. And we almost see the 5 years they'll spend with us at STiR, it's a fixed engagement with us, as almost like an extended fellowship, a sort of Teach for India on steroids, or a Cavalia on steroids as well over that period. they've got an enormous chance to change up to 2 lakh kids in a typical district in India, right? So we train them heavily. We invest about a month of training into them. And we have to walk the same talk in terms of intrinsic motivation. So they can't work at the teacher level. The role play we did was it was a good one, but they would not normally work directly with teachers that way. They would work with people in the system already, such as a cluster resource personnel, who is meant to be working with teachers, and they train and support them to run these networks with really high quality.
So based on the work you've done so far, what has been the impact on the ground?
So I think, first of all, that what's been really exciting is the demand from government and from teachers seems to be enormous. So we can't meet that demand right now. We're working now with almost 2 lakh teachers in India, about 40 lakh kids across the country in 35 districts. So 5% of all the districts in the country in 4 states.
That's very large.
Yeah, and we are under the hook with MHRD and others to get to 4 crore kids in India by 2025. So definitely feeling the pressure. And really one of the big questions is, can we scale at that speed while keeping obviously all of the other bits intact here? What gives me hope, I think, and energy is just seeing how the government is able to shift. And what we've done is we've developed a very cool progress pathway that looks at the behaviors of officials, teachers, and children and maps it all the way through month by month. And we're building an app now that can actually track that data in real time at massive scale. Hopefully one of the biggest databases in education that may come in the world as we grow this.
Isn't there a risk that in this mindless rush for scale, you are sort of not measuring the impact on learning outcomes of children?
So we've got a really comprehensive framework for measuring at the child level now. It took us a while. The core is the child, at the end of the day, are they intrinsically motivated to learn? And are they becoming a lifelong learner? Academic outcomes are certainly one part of the basket of that, and they're of course important. If you can't read, you can't access the curriculum, basic things like that. But there are already great providers like Pratham, for example. I've heard of a software program called MindSpark that does some of this and sort of even subject content as well.
Never heard of it.
No, exactly. So there are already these great technical seeds out there, right? And I think as a small NGO ourselves, there is no point trying to duplicate great partners in their work. We want to focus on the soil. How do we make it truly fertile so these other seeds can grow? So I've seen classrooms where, with MindSpark, for example, where teachers are really engaged, really motivated. They become the coach, the counselor. That is the vision that I think MindSpark is trying to go for. I've seen other classrooms where the teacher doesn't show up or stands in the back saying that the software is there. I don't need to do anything now. So it's how do you respond to that, create that environment. So of course academic learning outcomes are part of it, but we're measuring now, is the child safe in the classroom? Are they engaged? Are they developing curiosity, critical thinking? Are they developing confidence in their learning? And we're actually in discussions with the UN and with the SDG Global Monitoring Group whether to incorporate some of those metrics into part of SDG 4 over time, which is really important to make sure that the sector and our space recognizes the importance of intrinsic motivation and lifelong learning.
For the scholastic learning outcomes, the yardsticks that are typically in place are, percentage of children who can do multiplication, on particular sub-skills and competencies, what's the performance of the children. What are the yardsticks in place to measure progress for the work that you are doing?
So let me just give you a story for why I think those yardsticks are critical but not enough, right? So I was in Indonesia over the summer. We're launching our operations there. And the government we're slightly ahead of India. Kids can generally read, they can read a few words, a sentence, a paragraph, they can add and subtract numbers, those kinds of basic things. But the government there is as worried as the Indian government about their future workforce and citizenship. And what's coming out is I went to one of the best performing schools in Indonesia, went into the classroom and looked at what was going on. And they've got some of the best exam results by those yardsticks in the country. The kids were still sitting at their desk looking down, just copying what the teacher was saying. And the government is terrified because that's not going to be enough. If you ask them to discuss what that paragraph means or summarize it or give a counter argument, they cannot do it. And they don't have the workforce that a service economy will need in terms of that lifelong learner. So I think it was just a wake-up call for me about this foundational skill, the reading, numeracy, all of the, of course they're important, but they're just not enough. And I think instead, we need to look at, are we creating the enabling conditions for learning to happen that will help leapfrog that child to become, not just do that, but become a lifelong learner. So the elements of safety we measure, engagement we measure through classroom observation, critical thinking, curiosity. All of these things would have really cool new tools to measure, not just in an evaluation lens, but month by month in a government system for the first time. So rather than looking at these things as a curriculum play, many countries, South Africa, for example, has tried to change its curriculum to introduce 21st century skills. There's some early evidence it might be actually impeding reading progress because it's distracted everyone from the core thing. We need to look at the relationship between the teacher and the child instead and use that as a lens to bring that in. So it's not about adding half an hour of emotional safety, each week. Of course, that would not work. But how do we change the mindset of the teacher so they teach differently and become a different person? And the officials who support teachers, that's more sustainable, it's more cost effective. It now costs us 30 rupees per child per year to run STiR in India. But it also creates real system change around that all the way through a state education system.
Is that a target that you're chasing, 30 rupees per child per year?
So actually, I think it's too high already. So that's about 0.1% of what the government spends per child in India. We want to bring it down to about 10 rupees over the next 5 or 6.
And why is that important?
Because we don't believe cost should not be a barrier to this. We really believe the story for governments is that you can do this, you can change direction with your existing people and systems and budgets. This does not have to be a financial lift, but it does take some determination, leadership, and we've been lucky to work with great state leaders in places like Delhi, UP, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, who've been really able to invest in what we do. And they've made this the default for all their teachers across the 35 districts we work in now in India.
But the government is spending 20,000 rupees per child per year, about $300 per child per year. So there is money out there.
Yeah.
Shouldn't you be worrying more about the efficacy of what you do than diluting it in the interest of cost per child?
Because I think this whole dilution story gets us into the classic NGO game we've played for years, and I think we need to get out of this. We go in with this usually very high cost or relatively high cost intervention. We know in our heart of hearts we will not have the donor funding to stay there forever, as you told me as that teacher just a while ago. And yet we kind of play this game, right? We know there's no way to sustain this from the beginning. So instead we start with the end at the beginning and say, look, at the end of the day, the government is going to have to run this itself. From day one in our approach, government officials at the cluster level, the block level, the district level, they run and manage it from the start. We have one person per district, providing a bit of a safety net to help ensure that the quality goes up over time. We know in year one there will be some variable quality, but at the end of the 5 years, we should be at a point where things are consistently high quality and we're getting very, very strong impact at the child, teacher, and official level. But it forces the government to take it on from the beginning, as opposed to play this game where there's a beautiful demonstration and then magically in this handover, it's all handed over and it almost never happens, right?
Sharath, can you describe a story of a teacher that has gone through the STiR program? Have you seen any moments of transformation in that human being?
Of course, and probably, I guess being attached to the early days as well, one of the things that really struck me, there was a teacher in Delhi actually who we started working with initially. I remember meeting her in the very dusty corridors of her school, and I just, as I opened her door to her classroom, she said 4 months. And I said, what do you mean 4 months? She said, well, 4 months before I retire. And she was, on the last legs of her career, really was going to coast and wanted to sort of pretty much give up. And just actually a year and a half later, she wrote to me, I just remember the email vividly, just saying she had retired, she took her government pension, but she actually went back into work. And one of the things she did in her networks around building literacy and teaching English as a foreign language that she developed through the network meetings. She's now scaling across India.
Wow.
So just really these small things can make a big difference in how teachers feel. Yeah, so we try and focus every 3 months on a new area of evidence. So what we learned about behavior change is teachers need to start with the more tangible, practical stuff and then get to things that are more advanced. So in the first 3 months, it's often about routines in the classroom because they're very visible. If the classroom is managed better, the teacher feels the difference, the child feels the difference. That will motivate them to put more effort in, and you go into a positive spiral then. So we'll talk about how do you try and create good routines where, if you pass the paper around, for example, you do that efficiently. How do you call kids by name in those routines so you build emotional warmth in the classroom as well?
Can you describe the journey from, starting in a state, working with the state, and transitioning where the state takes ownership? What does that look like?
Yes, one of the hardest things we learned, Pranav, was learning to say no. And we created a system diagnostic which allows us to look at, are the key conditions for us to be successful in that state before we set up. So there are things like, is there a strong culture of leadership and belief in intrinsic motivation? Is there a strong middle tier of officials we can work through and train and support? Is there a commitment to evidence and data? And is there kind of what we call the chai test? Can I sit over a cup of chai with you like this in a government office with the permanent secretary or a senior official, and have a very open, honest conversation about what's going well, what needs to improve, without any blame or any kind of game playing, but we're committed to working and improving together. That cultural condition is the most important thing we look for. If those things are in place in a state, we will sign an MOU. These are not 2-page symbolic statements, they're 40, 50-page.
Wow.
MOU is probably the longest. We've given several officials heart attacks with the length of our MOUs these days, because we really believe it's important to spell out very clearly who's doing what.
Right.
And in that is a very clear financial equation where we really ask the state government to finance pretty much everything, from printing to transport to the venues to the time of teachers and officials. That sounds small, but when you're working with 2 lakh teachers, that adds up very fast. We are really keen to finance our own costs independently from donors and philanthropy, because we believe we need to have some independence from the government so we can be an equal partner in the relationship as well.
Can I do another role play with you?
Sure.
I become the person who has to sign the check on what the government has to pay. And you have to convince me to do this.
Sure.
Fine. So I'm a principal secretary of education of a large state that you're trying to work with. And this is my office. You've just walked in and I'm signing some files.
Good to meet you, Jane. And I've heard a lot about you. And just to take a pause, just perhaps I'll wait till you finish just the papers as well. No, so I've just heard a lot about you, and it's been really on my agenda to meet. We're really thinking of working in your state. We just wanted to really make sure you felt this was of value. We don't want to work in this unless you feel this is going to make a big difference to children and teachers in your state here.
See, there are a lot of reports that have said that my state is not doing great on learning outcomes. So if you can fix that, that'd be great for me.
So I think one of the things we learned with that, and we also got into this whole game around learning outcomes, our big reflection on this, honestly, after having learned, is that learning outcomes don't happen by magic, right? That doesn't fall from a tree onto a child. There've got to be some conditions in place. We talk about the soil being fertile for the child to want to learn in the first place. No? So they've actually got to, first of all, feel safe in the classroom. They've got to trust their teacher. They've got to be engaged. They've got to be curious and think about what they're learning as well. We create all of those conditions through our approach, and we help make the soil fertile for the many children who are in classrooms across your state there.
Great. So can you start tomorrow?
So actually, we'd prefer not to, G, if that's okay. We really think there's some important pieces in place first that we need to agree on. One is really knowing that we can use the capacity of your people, because they're the ones who will actually implement this.
Yes, we have a good team. They are, all over the state, and we're a better run state than most others, so we can get started.
No, I've heard that as well. So I think we clearly need your leadership, and that's absolutely critical. Obviously we don't have that, and it's what we won't go further. We would still want to make sure when we select districts to work initially, those district leaders are also engaged and motivated and interested in this approach, and we are happy to train and support them very. Yeah,
I'll write an order. I'll send it to everyone, and they will, do exactly what you say. What else do I have to do?
So I think beyond the order is appreciated, but I think rather than making an order, maybe perhaps a recommendation letter would be better. And we're happy to take that to the district officials and have a discussion. We won't work in a district unless there's real buy-in to what we're doing either.
Sure, we can do a VC, and I'll get all the DOs on it, and I'll explain them the program.
Great. I think if it's so much better if you can explain it. We'd be very happy to share and communicate it with you. Sure. If it comes from you, I think it'll be so much more powerful than we want to be in the back seat and in the shadows of it's your system, your improvement priority area. So we would love to work with you in that way if that's of interest.
And I am very tight on budgets. This year the PAB didn't approve, so I am assuming all of these costs are taken care of by you.
I think it's the opposite, unfortunately. I wish it was the case. I wish we were a really small NGO, honestly, and we can't finance this at scale. And the risk, if we try and take that on, in 1 year or 2 years, we're going to struggle to finance it, and it'll never be sustainable. So one of the conditions we asked you is that from the day one, this is part of your budget. There is a budget line that you already spend, 20,000 rupees typically per child in your state. You have a teacher training budget. All of this can be absorbed in that budget. You don't have to spend more. We can even give you some ideas from other states on how they've made it part of the budget. But for us, it's a no. It has to come from your state budget.
So thank you, Sharath. Sharath, one thing that I noticed in this role play is that you were pretty clear about walking away. Where does this confidence come from? Given that you have such high targets set by the MHRD to reach so many numbers, you have an opportunity with the state to get closer to that target. How are you walking away from this?
So I think one of the things we learned really painfully, honestly, I mean, we screwed up so many times on this before, is when we compromise that line of integrity with the state government, it all tends to collapse anyway. There's no point, and we don't want to be wasting government time, donor money, our own resources and focus on partnerships that won't have a chance of sustaining. So we've learned it's better to walk away. We've also, sometimes in the middle of an engagement, said we would also be happy to walk away as well if the state cannot continue to commit to what we need here. It's so important because we are promising something. The state has got to promise something back, and there's got to be this mutual response. That CHAI test I talked about has got to be a real one.
There's so much work to be done in India. Why are you running away to Uganda and Indonesia?
So there is a lot of work, I think, for sure. And certainly I would be very proud if our life's work reaches the 4 crore kids we talked about. But I think what is really exciting is that India is seen globally now as such a catalyst for innovation. And it would be a real shame for us not to use that and make what we developed in India from the very start, working with 25 teachers in 2012 when we met for the first time, now to see it 2 lakh teachers 7 years later, that story can really inspire other countries as well. So we've been very inspired by groups like the PAL network who've made south-to-south spreading of ideas, innovation, the core. We want India to be a great demonstration hub for other countries around the world. So when I went to the Indonesian government, all they wanted to talk about was India. What's happening in India? What's the Indian government saying? And more and more we're trying to exchange. We have the Ugandan Director of Education coming to India actually next week. How do we have more of that exchange happening so the countries themselves can learn? And we eventually want to make STiR really a best practice hub where countries themselves are learning and we're documenting and codifying the learning between countries. We want to get to 300 million kids by 2030. India will be by far the largest part of that, but it's really important that this inspires global action, not just in India for us.
Why are all these numbers so important to you? 4 crore, 300 million, 2025. Why are you so obsessed with them?
Yeah, so it's more just, I think we've been so guilty as a sector, Pranav, and we're also part of this, that we can be, we can pat ourselves on the back and say what a great approach this is, or intervention, what a great RCT study, but these are tiny, we're sort of dropping little bits in the ocean here. And if you really take the new education policy in India seriously, if you take SDG 4 at the global level seriously, we're not talking about a few thousand kids here and there. We're talking about every child. That's in the language of both those. If we believe in that as a sector and we're serious about it, we have not got much time left. We're 4 years in. There's a hell of a lot to do. We've got to take some big bets and be bold and make this happen. And I think we've got to lead the way and show that's possible, because right now there's so little faith in whether we'll reach anywhere near what our ambitions are. So I hope it's useful for STiR, but I think much more widely for the sector, just showing that change is possible at a large scale, and governments can be part of that solution and lead that solution as well.
What can India learn from other countries?
So I think one of the things that's really been interesting with the Indonesia experience there is it's one of the most decentralized systems in the world. Districts have a lot of autonomy there. That has many complications as well. But you can really see an interesting decentralization and empowerment of districts, and really very, very powerful local leadership as well. And I think sometimes in our states, we end up seeing the district just follows orders in very much the order that you suggested as the PS. I think we really need to engage districts and make them really the unit of change. India's got about 700 or so districts. That's where the change is going to come from, really.
So decentralization and giving autonomy to some of the system actors is one. What's the second?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is also about thinking broadly beyond, quote unquote, this learning outcome discussion has become, I think almost to a level has become something dangerous in India as well.
You're talking about learning outcomes have become dangerous? That's the first time I'm hearing it.
So I'm certainly not saying learning outcomes are dangerous, but they're critical, of course. But I think we've got into this mindset that they're enough. And Indonesia, which is just slightly ahead of India, shows us that's really dangerous thinking. What we're going to end up doing is we might achieve some of that, but right away hit another wall where the learning is not meaningful. This learning is gamed, basically, because governments can play these games well if they want to, whether it's through exams or through rote learning or teaching the test, all the things that happen in many countries. That's not going to create the workforce we need and the citizenship we need for a modern India.
What stirs you to do this day in and day out for so many years?
No, I mean, there have been really tough times, honestly, and sometimes we do feel like you're walking up, there's an uphill challenge all the way. I think what's really exciting is just seeing, I never thought I'd be saying 7 years later that the Indian government is pushing us to scale faster than we can scale. I thought we would be always the other way around. So the fact that there's been such trust among governments and demand among officials and teachers who tell us really that what we're doing is almost giving them the oxygen they need to breathe, that it's helping them see purpose and motivation in what they're doing anyway. That's what feels really, really exciting. And we know that kids value education. That's not the problem. So how do we configure the system to create that education that's really meaningful for the child?
Sharath, I remember 7 years ago, in 2012, we met at Ashish Dhawan's home. He had, galvanized a group of leaders who were working in the education sector together. And, you were telling me about STiR. What you told me in 2012, is that what you're still doing now?
Yeah, no, I remember it was a good dinner as well. So, but I remember we talked about it that day, and that's why I think the idea of having peers is so important, because at that point, at that time 7 years ago, my mind was really wrestling. I was feeling very troubled actually, because we'd started off STiR really trying to become like a grassroots JPAL, like trying to find these low, very scalable micro innovations, we call them, teaching practices we felt all teachers could benefit from. And when I met you at that dinner, we'd just finished this really exhaustive search across about 400 schools. I've been pounding the pavements of Seelampur and Shadra and so on with our colleagues for several weeks, and we felt very proud of ourselves at that point. We thought that we'd found some ideas we were going to publish and hope that other teachers would take them up. But something really strange happened, which I never expected, and that's that our phone in Delhi, and we only had 3 people those days, didn't stop ringing for days. And the calls were from teachers saying, look, I know my idea, my innovation wasn't selected, but you've awoken something in me that I haven't felt for a long time as a teacher. I felt, I've been able to meet other teachers, I felt a sense of energy I haven't felt before. I almost remember why I became a teacher in the first place. And we didn't have an answer. We just said, look, sorry, the competition's finished, and thank you, it's such a nice note, but we weren't sure what to do. But when we were talking, there were days of this happening, and we've got to respond. So with the team, we agreed that we would try a little trial out, and I'm a big fan of experiments. So we had talked to 400 teachers, and we hired the biggest place we could find. It was a really rickety wedding hall on the outskirts of Delhi in Shadra. And our team called the 400 teachers at random and said, please come to the beginnings of what we think will be some kind of network meeting. And I remember it was like 45 degrees centigrade that time, and it was July, August. That day was a Sunday. There was a big cricket, a test match final between India and England, nail-biting last day. And we were taking bets on the team how many people would show up of the 400, right? And I remember saying to my team, 80 people would show up. In fact, 340 teachers showed up on that day.
Astounding.
And many of them brought kids with them. We didn't know what to do. We had to set up a creche on the side just to cope with all that stuff. And I remember just this real sound of laughter and energy that became that almost a symbol of STiR from that period. And we realized we'd almost mistaken the baby from the bathwater, right? That accidentally we'd sort of kindle this intrinsic motivation among teachers to want to teach. That was actually much more important than any of these micro innovations we were finding. So it was pretty painful. We had to pivot, change, tell our donors, our board, we'd got the idea completely wrong and refocus it. But it was the best decision we made, and I feel it was so good to have the courage to change and being able to talk to people like yourselves and others like Ashish at that time as we went through that journey of thinking. It was incredibly powerful though.
Thank you, Sharath. I really enjoyed talking to you today. I learned about how listening and pivoting when needed is actually essential for survival. I also quite understood the fact that having quantified targets of number of children and cost per child actually is important given the limited time we have left to achieve the goals listed out in SDG. I was fascinated by hearing your story of over the last 7 years, how you've reached so many teachers and the beautiful human intrinsic motivation and how to really bring it out in a way that flourishes. It was such a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, man. It was such a pleasure as well. Thank you.